Welcome to Baby Wearing and Breastfeeding Nurturing Miracles. This is the podcast where we talk about everything baby wearing and breastfeeding, specifically tailored for our medically complex kids. I'm your host, Megan Pa, and today we're going to be joined by none other than Sonia Elder. So Sonia is really important to me. Not only has she helped me process the diagnosis of my son when I was pregnant, but she also helped me navigate the medical system when he was born. She also helped me with breastfeeding my first son, and she is the person that kind of led me to becoming a lactation consultant. And I'm really, really lucky to call her my aunt. So I get to talk to her all the time, and I'm really, really excited that I get to bring her on the show today so that you can hear from her as well. Sonia has 30 years of working in women's health. So she has been a nurse, a lactation consultant, a grief counselor. She specifically works with maternal and fetal complications of medically complex children. So I'm really excited to have her here. So with that, Sonia, can you tell us a little bit about how you got into being a lactation consultant and then going from there to where you're at now?
Well, first of all, you're trying to make me cry with that beautiful introduction. It is an honor to watch you in your career and what you've done for women. And so it's an honor to just be a part of this. So I will tell you, it seems that our paths may have kind of followed a little similar track. I initially became an RN and fell into women's health because while I was going back to school to get my degree, I worked in an OBGYN office because the schedule was more flexible. And the provider that was in that practice was someone that literally started me recognizing the difference that I could make. And then everything else paralleled where I was in my life. When I got pregnant, it was like, oh, I'm going to learn about childbirth. And so I got my certification, my Lamaze certification in childbirth education. And then it was like, oh my gosh, breastfeeding, this is a big deal. And the next thing you know, I got certified in lactation, and it was a big deal. We started baby friendly at it was MCV then. So it was just a good trajectory of my life as these things happened. Thank goodness, as I moved into having these specialties, the next thing I fell into was working with what we call high-risk pregnancies, or now medically complex is the term that's used mostly. And I was just to be on a journey with parents that are going through that. And like you said, just be an advocate and support them. That's where I found my calling. And it is not an easy path because you're dealing with like the 2 to 3%.
Yeah.
And so sometimes you forget that, 97, 98% of pregnancies are completely normal. And when I say normal, common, and that, there are these 2 to 3% that have some type of maternal or fetal, indication that would make them complex. Which then led me into pregnancy loss and grief counseling specifically. I worked with Fetal Infant Mortality Review, which is where you were interviewed with moms who had losses up to a year in infancy and tried to help navigate and figure out what ways could minimize that. And that let me know that was, again, a special calling that I felt drawn to. And that's when I did the, chaplaincy and those things. So
I'm really curious actually, because, most, like you said, what is most common is for 98% of pregnancies to be normal. And then, when you fall into that bracket of like, okay, this isn't normal, like with Tyson and his hydronephrosis, that is actually one of the most common like abnormalities to see on an ultrasound. I don't know what percentage, like he just fell into the lucky category of also only having one kidney, and also out of that one kidney, only half of it being functioning.
Right.
But I mean, I'm just curious, what are some of the other conditions that are very common that you see in fetal complications?
So again, remember, I'm not the genetic counselor, so I'm the one that just, in my experience,
in your experience.
and remember, my experience is even more narrow than what we call maternal fetal medicine, because I am now working with life-limiting, lethal, a lot of complications. So what may seem for me to be the majority still may be the less than percentage. But some common ones you may hear about are open neural tube defects, like spina bifida. That is one that you may hear. Another one that's not as common, but is also an open neural tube defect, is called anencephaly, or you'll hear acrania. And that's where the brain and skull don't develop in the fetus. And a lot of these are not genetics. They are, developmental from the very beginning of, development of an embryo. So, nowadays when people have ultrasound so early, or, lab tests and things, you can pick. Some other common ones are trisomy 21. That is a common condition that we see, and trisomy 18, trisomy 13. A lot of those are what you hear called miscarriage, but the appropriate term is a spontaneous abortion or a missed abortion earlier in the pregnancy.
Can you explain, cases. So trisomy 21, and is it trisomy or trisomy? Trisomy 21, that's Down syndrome.
Correct.
What is 18 and 13?
I'd have to look those up, the names. There are genetic names for that. And if you need me to, I can look them up and provide those for you.
We'll add them in the notes. Well, we can add them in the chat notes. Yeah. I thought that would be interesting for our listeners to understand, especially if they connect with that. So specifically, your role is when these women come to you and they have found out their baby's diagnosis, you are helping them process their emotions at this time. Do you help them navigate the medical field now and put their team together?
So there is actually, we're fortunate enough at our institution that there is a specific position called perinatal complex navigator.
Oh, that's nice.
And so that nurse is specifically responsible for connecting, like you in your pregnancy, to the correct specialist. So you would have gotten connected to the pediatric urologist, or to MRI, or if your baby had a cardiac condition, to, peds for a fetal echo, a heart test or things like that. So that is her specific job. Mine is, once it's diagnosed, to offer options. And then we get referrals now from all over the East Coast, and from genetic counselors and physicians, direct calls from parents who find us, who just want to know what their options are, and then connecting them to the appropriate resources. If they want to know more about their condition, making sure they get connected, to the complex care program. If they want to interrupt the pregnancy, getting them connected to that.
Yeah.
So all those things.
Yeah, no, that's really good. And I mean, I want to have the difficult conversations about, because when a woman finds out that her baby is medically complex and she's in her pregnancy, she has got so many different things to consider. So, I think one of the things that comes to mind is, what is the likelihood of her carrying the baby to term? And then once the baby is born, how long is the baby going to survive, depending on what condition the baby has, and having to navigate all of those questions in addition to processing the experience. Also, I think that what is, interesting and why I want to talk about and bring up is just, they're processing these things is like, this is a difficult conversation to have, but like, you getting people from all over the country, like what state do they live in? Are people traveling to you to come and see you to help you to help them with this?
Absolutely. So the way the way the country is right now, it's very difficult for women to just be offered options because of fear of the providers. Oh, sorry, my lights went out. Fear of the providers.
Move the mouse.
Yeah. I got to remember that. I'll be a little closer this time. The providers in certain states have fear of even documenting that they've offered. And so, offered these options to families. And so the families are ending up reaching out on their own. And I know we're not going to really talk about it today, but I just want to make sure that we do understand too that there are maternal complex issues as well. That carrying a pregnancy to term can be life-threatening for the mother. And so, we want to make sure that we're hooking those women also to appropriate resources. And it also is a hugely difficult and traumatic path that really requires good counseling and grief support as well.
Absolutely. I'm really glad that you mentioned that because, when we're talking about pregnancies, it's a dyad. It's not just the fetal development, it's the mother too. Exactly. And how is her health conditions, impacting how is the pregnancy impacting her health condition?
Absolutely.
And it's really important that you brought that up because I don't want listeners to hear this and think of it as one-sided because it's not. It's not one-sided.
No,
we have to look at them as a dyad and as together. So, and we really want, these are really tough conversations to have and difficult choices to make. And I want to definitely make sure that people understand that this is a safe space and that people that are listening to this show, is also a non-judgmental space.
Absolutely.
Because I think that one of the things that women have to navigate when they have such, and they're in the 1% or the 1% of the 1% with their pregnancies and their complications, that they are feeling like they're being judged for whatever decision that they are making. And that is really tough. It's just like layer upon layer of things that they have to navigate. And it is so important to, number one, have support, have resources, and, to recognize that none of this is easy. And none of this is also, it reminds me of, and you can talk to this, but it reminds me of like how you go through stages of grief. Like you can process and make some of these decisions and then you're working your way back and you're having to do it all over again because of all the different layers. So
we're going to talk about that, but you make a very good point. One, again, it's a safe space. And I tell parents all the time, there's no question you can ask. And you need to ask. And I tell my friends, my coworkers, everyone, I would rather you ask the question, tell me what concerns you about certain aspects so that we can talk it through. And then maybe we'll come to an understanding. Maybe we'll still disagree about certain things. But what we are is respectful and understanding that this is parenting. And, parenting, whether you continue a pregnancy or interrupt a pregnancy, is parenting. You are trying to do your very best for the child that you're caring for. Whether it's a living child or a child in utero, you're doing your very best. And decisions that we make in this moment, and in fact, my children are your age, right? And I still think about, well, maybe I would have done this differently. But different is because now I'm in a place that's different. Yep. And so I might make different decisions now in the next day, in the next week, in the next 10 years. But that's because we're in a different place and have different information. And I think we just have to be kind and gentle with ourselves and others. And really make sure that we know. Sometimes saying even I would do this. How many times have we said, oh, I would definitely do this? And then you get to that situation and you're like, what was I thinking? I can't do this. I swore that my kid would never have a snotty nose or a messy
Right.
t-shirt,
Or
right?
eat McDonald's.
Exactly
Just in
right.
the third time this week.
Exactly right. I mean, it's like, you do the very best you can. And sometimes our best is great, and sometimes our best is not so great, but it's not because we didn't try.
Yeah.
And so if we can always be gentle with parents, I think, and one of the questions later is, what's the thing that I've learned most? And it's like, there is no one way. There is no right or wrong. It is the best we can do with where we are.
Yeah.
And being gentle with ourselves and kind to others.
I really love that you said that, because I think so much is like when you are making decisions from a place of going through trauma,
right?
I feel like your brain doesn't work. There's like this brain fog or brain haze that you get. And, I talked about it like in my first episode, because when I was talking about being in the NICU with Tyson, and the moment when, you have so many doctors come and talk to you in the NICU like every day, and it can be overwhelming. And then here you are too, like if you have carried this baby to term and then you've given birth, and now you're also like in a NICU, your body is physically exhausted,
right,
for the mother. So I one specific thing that I mentioned that I'm sure some people can relate to in different ways is that brain fog, which is that we had them come in and talk so much about how babies couldn't have a kidney transplant until they were 22 pounds. And Tyson was born at 8 pounds, and they thought for sure he was going to need one soon. And my brain, they left the room with that information, and Soap and I's brains went immediate to like, oh, he's going to die because he's not going to make it to 22 pounds. I wasn't thinking clearly enough to realize that they could do dialysis on an infant, even though that's not ideal. But like immediately we broke down because my brain wasn't thinking, and I was in such a fog and a haze. I needed somebody else to make my brain work for me. And so I think so many of the people that you see are working so hard just to process their emotions that their brains are not like able, they need help. Like, I can't imagine somebody having to deal with like a lot of this stuff by themselves without somebody navigating them. Well, and so I think going back to what you said about how we have to be so gentle with ourselves, because even fast forward, a few months or a year, and you're like, oh, that was so silly of me to think that way. But you got to recognize like these moms are like going through trauma, so their brains are not thinking clearly, and you got to be really gentle with yourself, and for however long of time that you need. So I love that you specifically brought that up and said that there does not have to be run one right way.
No. And we know that we have to hear things 3 times. When we're processing, we have to hear things 3 times. And one of the grief support groups with women who had gone through pregnancy loss, we got them to say some of the things that had gone, as well as could be expected with their process, and things that we could improve. And one of the things was, make sure that you have, you recommend for them to have a notebook and paper whenever they're talking, with someone about it, whether it's on the phone or in person, because what they can write down, and then when we read it later, we can be like, oh, I wrote that one key word. Why did I write that? What does that mean? Or if both partners or, whoever's gone with you, your support person, is writing as well, that helps. It's like, oh, they heard this, I heard that. And now you can kind of put it together and ask more formative questions. But having an advocate, and I will tell you that having someone that it's not directly affecting, so the parents are both wrapped up in it. And, I say this having been with parents in childbirth, it is an experience for both of them. So the expectation that the partner can just like handle everything is too much. Just because the woman happens to be pregnant, the other partner has, so many other things going on too. And I think that having just another, pair of ears to hear that's not completely engaged in, like you said, that trauma or numbness or shock can be very helpful. It's almost like a doula for, navigating this process. So they may not be, like interjecting themselves, but when they leave, they can say, this is what I heard, or, this was what was important to you. Did you want to ask this?
Yeah.
That kind of thing. So
there's so many gold nuggets in what you're saying, kind of just like recapping everything. Like the first is obviously be so kind to yourself, and for everybody else listening, non-judgmental. The second thing, honestly, I love that you are bringing up the partners, right? Because absolutely, like it is their loved one, their baby, like they're processing it too and not
absolutely.
thinking. And the third is, because both of you are processing this, to have somebody else, well, actually third and fourth, right? Because then you offered the suggestion of writing everything down. Man, looking back, I kind of wish that I had done that. But I was lucky enough to have you and have Julie. So Julie, for people listening, Julie is my sister. And so I still, like, when I still have to call and be like, this is what they said, and I'm probably not thinking of all the questions I should ask, because having a second person who is non, I mean, you may be slightly emotionally, and you are a little emotionally involved, but you're a step removed. You're a step removed. So your brain is thinking.
I mean, obviously, I care about you, or care about Tyson.
Yes.
But my everyday life is not affected by that.
Exactly. So you're able to be like, ask this. What about this? Like, have you talked to this person? And then I'm like, oh, no. Yeah, I should get like a second opinion and take him to see another specialist. Do you know what I mean? Like that's
child life, right?
Yeah,
the child life specialist. I mean, something when he's going through his surgeries, and Simone and Lincoln and Rowan and him and everybody needs a little, so be focused on them.
Exactly. That's another, oh my gosh, that's a fifth good nugget. And so for the people that listening that are dealing with a really complex pregnancy and these big decisions, having to think about your children at home, because again, we're talking about the mother and the father processing it, but siblings do too. 100%
Absolutely.
Siblings do too. Especially, let's think about like a woman that is farther along in her pregnancy, the other children know it. Maybe they're excited. Maybe they're not aware of any complications. And then having to go home and be like, no, this is what's happening. They're going to process it, and having somebody to help them process it individually and as a family is so important. Yeah.
I try not to insert my very personal opinions about things, but as specializing also in children in grief, I will tell you, children always know. They know something is not okay with their parents. Yeah. So whether they know you're pregnant or not, whether they know anything's going on with the pregnancy or not, they know something is going on. So trying to protect them, which we do as parents, or trying to, not give them information to protect them, really, in my experience and in the grief groups I've done with children, can delay their processing. One of the things that's really important to know is that when we grieve, depending on our age, we have to then grieve every time we go into a new developmental phase.
Interesting.
So if a 3 to 5 year old loses, someone dies, and they're processing it as a 3 to 5 year old, they will then process again as a school age child, as an adolescent, and as an adult, because we process loss differently at every developmental stage. So if they, one of the things that I hear commonly is an adult say, I found out when I went through this that my mother had a loss. Okay. And so the mom never mentioned it. And this, person grew up. And then when they experienced that, they were told. So now everybody's processing that loss. Oh, I had a sibling that I didn't know about. The future, again, we talk about siblings, grandparents. Everyone is involved in this, everyone, is processing in a way that needs to be supported. And we call it anticipatory grief. And I think we need to understand that grief doesn't mean someone has died. It means that there is a change or a loss that's occurred that we weren't expecting, and that requires processing. So, I had it explained to me very early that when you have a pregnancy, no one expects anything to be wrong or medically complex or anything. So that's like planning a trip to Italy. Like, oh, we're getting all the baby stuff. We're planning to deliver here or do a home birth or breastfeed. Sorry. Breastfeed, do all these things. And we've planned this trip beautifully, right? And we started planning the minute we found out. Well, then somewhere along the journey, maybe you're on the flight and the plane lands in China. And you're like, wait a minute, I learned Italian. I made a menu. I picked all the hotels and restaurants. And now that I've landed in China, wait a minute. It's not that China's not okay. It's just I wasn't planning for that. I don't understand that. And now I've got to learn a new language. I've got to learn how to adapt and adjust to this. So you're going to grieve your loss of Italy, even though China's a lot of beautiful things to see there and try and learn and eat and do. So I had someone explain that to me with a child, that you're expecting this child to have this path, this pregnancy, this child. And then when it takes, a turn or a different journey, we have to adapt to that. And some of us are better adapters than others.
Yeah, no, that is really, really interesting. I mean,
it just makes you think, how many times in your life, in everyday life, do you say, oh yeah, I'm going to drive to work, and then whatever, there's a flat tire, there's your detour, and you're just like, how can you process that? I can get really angry, I can get really sad, but the reality is it is what it is. And now I've got to move, one way or another.
Yeah,
and it's okay to cry for a minute or yell.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So that anticipatory grief for all of us, whether you continue a pregnancy or interrupt a pregnancy, it's still anticipatory grief. You're still going to have some grief associated with that. I'm sure you and Soap did.
Yeah. Can you walk me? That's really so interesting. I've never heard it explained like that. I love that. And that really makes you think about all the people around you too, that are walking this with you. Can you walk me through more in depth? Like you mentioned anticipatory grief, like for those listening that are kind of new to this, or maybe not so familiar with like the stages of grief. And because I didn't even think about that until you said it, like the anticipatory grief of, knowing that this is not going to be the normal healthy pregnancy. And also, I think what's also wrapped up in there is that for the people that choose to continue with the pregnancy or choose to, give birth and see how long, like not knowing what to expect, I guess. There's so many other emotions wrapped up into that, hope, anxiety. Also, this is really, nobody really talks about this, but like, even if you are having a medically complex pregnancy and you're going to carry the baby to term and you're hoping for the best outcome, what's really weird? You still want people to say congratulations. You still want to give birth and and so I think a lot of people forget that when you share the news of like, I'm pregnant, I'm going to have this baby, but also this baby has these things. When the person that you're sharing the news hears that, they go immediately to sympathy and pity. And sometimes, a lot of times we just need to hear like, congratulations, you're having a baby,
Or tell me how you're feeling about that.
Yeah.
Tell me, how are you feeling about all this that's going on? And if you say, oh gosh, I'm so excited, I know this is going to be difficult, but I'm excited, then I can say, you know what, I'm excited for you. And even though it may be difficult, that there is joy and happiness associated with this. So the other thing is, just with pregnancy, when people say I'm pregnant, everyone's first response is congratulations. Well, what if it was unplanned? What if you're getting ready to, go on this big school journey and, pregnancy was not a planned thing? It's okay to say, tell me how you're feeling, feel out the person,
Yeah, God, that is such another really good gold nugget that, ask them first, how are they feeling about it? And then, you can respond appropriately to that. Because when somebody tells you that they're expecting, like, obviously you're getting the news from somebody that values you. You're somebody that's important to them in their life that
Right.
they're sharing this big news from. And so you love that person. You want to respond to them in a supportive way. And so the best way to do that is to ask them how they are feeling about it.
Tell me about that. And when we're talking about this, so let's even go one step deeper. So let's say someone finds out in a pregnancy that there's this medically complex condition, and maybe it was an unplanned pregnancy that really they were just getting used to, right? They're about 18, 20 weeks maybe, and they're just now getting to the place where, you know what, maybe I'm going to be okay. And this is, I'm going to get through this. And then they find out that they have this medically complex condition. And now they're thrust into, all this information and having to make decisions. And really one that's topmost in their head is guilt. Like, wait a minute, I initially thought that I didn't want to be pregnant. And, there is no magical thinking. We're not children. We cannot wish these things on. Yeah. And so I think just, sometimes you have to be really blunt and very clear, with folks. That's why I never use words like passes or sleeping, especially with children. You have to say dying. You have to say, very ill. You have to say those things. People don't understand. What does life limiting mean? Mm-hmm. It means that their life will be impacted continuously with this condition. So trying to be very clear, very direct, but also not use a lot of words. Which I have a tendency to do sometimes.
That is so important that you brought that up, because I think that people are afraid to speak directly, but it's really important for processing it, not only emotionally, but just making decisions. And that's important for your providers, for a woman's provider.
Absolutely.
To be direct for them and not talk around the subject, because providers, like, they're people, they feel for you. They don't want to maybe sometimes give the information in a way that it's going to be like, oof, but you have to, you do. Have to.
They're human. They're human, just like we are. So, and they have feelings as well. We don't know what they bring, when they come to. So, again, being gentle with them, but also saying, look, I hear you saying these things, but again, you're in the fog. And the other thing I just want to be really clear on is counseling. When you get a diagnosis, or when you hear a diagnosis or something that's going on in the pregnancy, even without having anything going on in the pregnancy, just being pregnant is a reason to have someone to talk it out with, to be supportive with. And again, that counselor or therapist is another person that is removed, that can hear what you're saying and actually help you develop maybe the questions you need to ask, because maybe this is one thing that you're fixated on or worried about, and it's really not something, to be anxious about.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is somebody that, like, in future episodes where I'm going to be talking to a mental health therapist, because if you are navigating this path, like, that's so important. It really is important, because it's just so complex. I think trying to dig yourself out of that hole, you need a little assistance for sure.
You do. And again, I'm not a fan of Googling at all.
Yeah.
I know lots of people do it, and the second you hear this word, you Google it, or when you're looking for options or that is not the best place to go. And the reason for that is because everyone needs guidance. Mm-hmm. And so if you come to me and say, this is what the doctor said, then I can give you reputable Google sites to go to, as opposed for you just typing in the search engine this one word. We all know when we type in breast, what happens when we Google that. Right? I mean, my work used to block it when I would type in things for my job.
Yeah, that's so funny. I'm so
So,
glad that you mentioned that. Actually, I've got two stories that relate to that. I mean, clearly you just brought up, like, as a lactation consultant, like, a mom can go on there and type in all kinds of crazy things. I literally just had a patient yesterday saying that she was like changing the settings on her pump every 2 to 3 minutes because that's what she read on the internet to tell her
right.
to do. And I was like, oh, geez,
Yeah.
that's a lot.
Yeah.
And so you direct her. I was like, gosh, go to these websites. If you're a parent, go to the CDC, the National Institute
Exactly
of Health.
right.
If you're looking for lactation stuff, La Leche League, Kelly Mom,
Right.
a personal relation to that story is, again, and this was even recent. It's like, nowadays when you go and get tests, like, you can get any kind, even for yourself, right? You get blood tests, you get ultrasounds, like scans, and then because everything's through the computer and online, you'll have a portal and you'll get the test results before you even talk to your doctor.
I know.
My love-hate relationship with that.
It is. It is a very love-hate relationship. It's like having access to your children's grades every minute of every day. That is not a good thing. Everybody has not a good day. You can't focus on snapshots. You have to look at the big pictures.
Yeah.
And so going onto the portal and getting results that are normal, but because they're, 0.01 under, and everybody just like, goes crazy. I mean, I am absolutely an advocate for having your own information. But when you get that information, one, I think there needs to be a provider readily available.
Yep.
And so, to be able to say, look, you're going to see these results. If you can just give me till the end of clinic day today, I'll walk through that with you. Okay. But please give me a minute. Don't panic, and I'll walk through it with you when we can sit down and talk, so that you're not anxious all day long waiting to hear back from, the provider about, like, oh, what does this mean? What is it, doing? And some of it is serious, like that you can see your fetal echo. How are you supposed to navigate that?
That's what I was
a fetal heart
thinking.
testing.
Yeah, I was just thinking that. And also, like, if you already know that you have a complex pregnancy and that there's issues going on, and, like, let's say, because we get seen a lot, like, let's say we're at our weekly perinatologist visit, you're getting your weekly scan,
yes,
and then you get it sent right away, and it'll say to you, extreme swelling of, such and such, and, like, swelling of, extreme swelling and thickening of the bladder. Like, obviously I'm referring to, like, stuff with Tyson, but and so you're reading that and you're like, oh no, oh my God. But then the doctor gets on maybe a day later. So now you've had 24 hours to just panic. And the doctor gets on and it's actually like, no, this is fine. Like, this is not a change from the previous.
No changes.
It's no change. So it's okay. Like, we're pretty stable from what the discussion.
But you had 24 hours of, exactly.
Yeah, unnecessary stress right there. Yeah, so really important to let your provider talk to you so you can avoid the unnecessary stress.
You're right.
Okay, so kind of, can you share any stories of parents that have found out that they're going through this, and something that really has touched you in the way of, like, their resilience or grit? Because one of the things that is really important to me, really the reason that I actually wanted to create this podcast, was because nobody who has any kind of a health condition, especially when it's your child and you can control it, or can't control it, nobody chooses that storm. Nobody chooses to walk that path. But you have to. Like, this is what you got to do, and you got to weather the storm. And so one of the things that I wanted with this podcast was to give parents a sense of resilience and grit. Because nobody is sitting here, nobody can tell you that it's going to be okay, because maybe it's not. Maybe it's not going to be okay. But you got to be resilient, and we got to walk the path. So are there any specific stories that that you have worked with that have just struck out at you that maybe you don't have to share specifics, but that those families really had resilience and grit, like a tidbit that you could share with everybody?
So I'm just going to use a different example for the fact that you are the prime example of continuing a pregnancy, making sure that you were an advocate for your child, getting the best resources that you could, surrounding yourself with your village, and again, being an advocate, That's all I can say over and over. You shouldn't necessarily have to be your own advocate, but you are your child's advocate. And so you are the prime example of that for continuing. And so I think every day, maybe there are minutes that you don't think about it. Maybe there's even an hour that you don't think about it, but I bet it's not an every day. I'm pretty sure for you, there's not an all day where you just, it doesn't somehow flow through. Now, it may not interrupt anything, but it's a flow through. It's a processing of your life. And because it's now your norm, you don't think about it. You don't think it's anything extraordinary, but it is. It's one more thing as you care for all your children that it's there. So I'm going to give an example of someone that it works in another way. And so someone that was referred to me by the social worker that worked with me here, and it was a friend of hers and a colleague who had in a pregnancy, found out at their 20-week scan that there was a very, very severe brain abnormality. They already knew the gender. They had already named the baby. It was a much wanted pregnancy. And then they proceeded to have every test that they could, every second opinion that they could, which then is taking you weeks. And, as you get fetal MRIs of the brain and talk to pediatric neurologists, and you're trying to figure out what quality of life this child is going to have, if they even survive. Mm-hmm. And it really came to the consensus that it was absolutely not going to be any type of positive outcome, that the baby would definitely die. They just couldn't say when and how much difficulty. Yeah. And as a parent, again, suffering for our children, things like that, we do the best we can. And so with huge support and processing, they elected to interrupt the pregnancy, which in and of itself was, one of the most difficult times of their life. But we don't think about pregnancy after loss. And this coincidentally was a first pregnancy. And so they took years of counseling and grief support to decide, because they found out after they elected to interrupt the pregnancy. And you'll hear termination for medical reasons. That's another term that's used. I tend to use interruption of pregnancy for medical reasons. They found out that it was genetics. It was, so there was a 25% chance with every pregnancy that this would occur. And so that required a lot of soul searching. And anyone that's listening who's been through reproductive endocrinology knows that it can be a very expensive process to do that. And especially when you have a condition like this where you're trying to, negate maybe some of the pain you might experience. Well, I don't know what could be braver or more courageous. And that's what I tell people. Courageous is being brave in the face of fear, when you're really afraid and yet you continue. And they elected to try and have a pregnancy again. And they had, all the tests, all the anxiety leading up to that. So they were able to do testing on the pregnancy to determine that he was a carrier, but did not have the actual abnormality. I know.
I think I was holding my breath for some of that.
I know.
Like that, I know. That story.
there are some that aren't as beautiful as this turned out. And so, I don't want to be a complete downer, but this is what we do every day. We see the parents that do have repeated losses and repeated conditions. But for this family, and he turned 4.
I love it. I love it.
And yet they think about their previous baby and they talk to their son all the time. She's remembered in their life. And he will grow up knowing that he had, a sister.
Oh, I love it. That's beautiful.
That is courageousness. That is, every day knowing something impacts your life and still choosing to be joyful and move forward with hard work, the same way you do, with hard work every day. And some days you want to be just like,
I think that is what helps people weather the storm, is even though you can never know the outcome, is that knowing that you are not in that storm alone, even if people's stories are not relatable to yours.
Absolutely.
Like the condition is totally different.
Correct.
But just that it's, because you're a Lamaze teacher. It's even just dialing it back to something that's very natural for us and got us to 10 billion, 9 billion people on this planet is birth. When you are giving birth, and it is so intense knowing that the strength that you get just knowing that you are not the only person that has done this before or that is doing that moment. And so
it's your moment, moment.
That's that exactly it. But
you are connected to the half of the population that has also done it.
Exactly. And so I think that women families can get resilience and grit hearing the stories of others, especially one like that, where they have faced so many challenges and so much difficulty and grief, and they just kept going. And that is strength. That is strength.
And she is a resource now and has been for other parents going through similar conditions. She does counseling because as a social worker, she's able to provide counseling professionally as well as personally, support groups. It's she has now taken her experience and gone forward with that, random acts of kindness. I don't know if you've ever heard of that, but this isn't random, but she has chosen to take what was a very traumatic experience and make sure that others, can process and move through it as well. So
yeah, that's beautiful. Can I ask, so a personal reflection? I mean, you are 30 years in now to like a beautiful
I fudged a little because I didn't want you to think I was older, but it's technically, I'm even sad to say it's 36 years.
Oh my God, that's amazing.
In women's health.
A little.
And then probably, 30 specifically in perinatal loss and grief counseling.
Yeah. And how gorgeous are you? Oh my gosh, fudge a little for 36 years in. I love it. How is it? But what I want to know specifically is like you work with the 1% of 1%. Do you feel like it has changed your view on pregnancy and being a parent?
It had. And I'm not sorry to say, but it does make me a little sad that because of the people that love me and know what I do, when anyone is pregnant, it is like I always am cautiously optimistic, but long gone is that, naive feeling that everything will be okay. And so I grieve that myself a little bit. And I tell you, when you're grieving for you're anxious about being pregnant yourself, it is tenfold for your grandchildren.
Yeah, no, I honestly, I love this conversation because you get so in it about yourself, and it's not meant to be like narcissistic or selfish, but you do forget that like there's so many other people that care for you and love for you, and that they're getting stressed too, and they're navigating.
Exactly right.
Yeah. Do you think that it's changed you're very your outlook is you're more cautious, you're cautiously optimistic about pregnancy. How do you think it's changed your feelings as a parent and as a grandparent? I mean, and specifically, do you think that you live more in the present, and do you value that everyday moment more because
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. And I have always been more of a live in the moment kind of person anyway. But it definitely makes me realize that I, I thought I was moving so
That's
much.
okay. I just realized I'm moving my computer all around. It's fine.
I know. I feel like that I was trying to think that I want to make sure that we're very clear that this is the minuscule minority that we're talking about, that I work with. And so I have to keep that in my head as well, because it is all of what I do, but it is such a small piece. And so I take joy in a lot of places. As you well know, me sitting on my back patio and just staring at nothing is a joy for me. You know, that is a joy. Spending time with, my family is a huge joy for me. And so we have to take that self-care. And I think females, the female gender tends to not do self-care quite as well as our male counterparts. So I do think that we need to be very careful and make sure that we are doing self-care every day. And even if it's 5 minutes, I think that's important. I think that we need to recognize that we can make a difference, right? That we can make a difference, a small difference, all right? But any difference is a difference. That we're not going to be able to change the bigger evil. I mean, that's just the reality. I can't change what is going on in other states or what may even be going on in my own state. What I can do is support the people and find a safe space to land, which is that self-care, and leaning in. We have to connect. That is what being human is, connecting to others. When we talk about, one of the things we didn't really get into is some of the grief, the mementos that we create. One of the ones that meant the world to me, and I wish I would have known about it even when I was having my own children, is breast milk mementos.
I love those. I
Breast
do
milk
love
jewelry.
those.
Can you
Yeah.
imagine, as a parent of a child that has died, that, and even if you, like these moms, we work on trying to, if they don't want to donate, then we work on suppression, obviously, but you literally need 5 mLs. So you're not like keeping the supply going, because that can be, I need lactation consultants that are listening to be aware that that can be another added trauma.
Huge.
They're getting through that loss, and then 2 to 3 days later, they're transitioning. And so there are things that we do if they choose not to pump and donate, which is rare, because for some women that is a continuation of that grief process, that they're continuously reminded. But I have had a few women do that and feel like that is their way of,
Processing and
honoring,
connecting. Yeah.
their baby's life. But the breast milk jewelry, just for me, that memento is a big deal. So I love that.
I'm so glad that you mentioned that. God, honestly, I think we could have this conversation for like a whole nother hour.
I know. And I do think that maybe I got us too confused. I think maybe there should be a whole separate thing on just pregnancy loss, and that,
oh my God.
maybe just working on medically complex.
This makes me think you need to come back. We need to do a whole nother thing, and just dive deep into all these different topics, because you hit so many good points. Because absolutely, and not just, you mentioned mementos and loss, and that is so important. I want to spend time going back to that, but let's shelf it for another one. But also with medically complex babies, being able to, even if you don't know whether or not that you're going to have this baby long, but if you choose to breastfeed or you choose to pump and provide breast milk, like the bonding and the connection that can provide, and just helping you process it. But again, I want to be really clear about, and I'm sure like I might get heat for this, but like, I want to be really clear that women have reasons for their decisions. And so if they decide to have a medically complex kid and not to pump and breastfeed, like, here I am, a lactation consultant, and so are you, saying that we got to respect that. You know what I mean? Because this is a huge trauma that they're going through. And so while it can be really helpful to do that, if they choose not to, like, that's something really important that we have to respect.
And that's, you asked how my career, how I perceive things has changed. I'm sorry to say, probably in my early career, I was aggressive with the way I believed I should give information to parents. And over all this time, I have recognized that, again, we all do the very best we can. And I can provide you the information.
Mm-hmm.
I can tell you that, yes, breast milk for a medically complex child
it's going to be really helpful.
Can do these things. But I can also tell you that your mental health is as valuable to this child. And for the long haul of this. And so you have to do. And also, there's no all or nothing. Yes. There is no all or nothing.
Oh, I love that. 100%.
Your baby wearing, sometimes people have a hard time reconciling that you cannot breastfeed, but you can baby wear and do skin to skin, and that it is absolutely, and I'm like, there's no all or nothing. You can get some of those benefits that we tout with breastfeeding by just doing skin to skin or baby wearing. And so I really want to make sure that we recognize that it is a spectrum. There is no this way, that way. It is a spectrum. And maybe one day you're feeling it and one day you're not feeling it. So, all those things. I think that it may not seem that I'm more relaxed in my thoughts, but certain things I am.
First of all, let me just say how privileged I feel being able to have this conversation with you, and even more so to be able to share it because of all of your gold nuggets. I'm going to keep going back to that you have shared. But I want to throw in one thing, and that is most of the people that work in such a specific niche as perinatal maternal loss and medical complexities, this specifically with women's health, you come to it from a place of passion and caring so intensely and wanting to be so supportive and helpful that you're coming from such a loving place, and that we are all having to navigate it. And it's a learning process to remove our own egos and just focus on how can I best show up and serve you and connect with you as another human being and a person. And you do that so well. And so I'm really glad that people were able to listen to you, because I think that now more than anything, and I'm really expanding this out, but just in the social issues that we have going on in the world right now, how important connection is and support is, and just as human being to human being. So it has been such a privilege to have you here. And I'm going to say Aunt Sonia instead of Sonia Elder. Thank you so much, Aunt Sonia, for coming and talking to everybody. And, I'm really going to try to tease out another future episode from you after winter.
After we get off, I'll be like, oh man, I forgot that.
All the good things.
And I know it's not airing today, but you know what? Vote.
Oh my gosh, please. Yes, absolutely. That's right. Today's the 7th. Come on. Yeah. So people won't be listening to this then, but absolutely. Thank you again so much, everybody. Thank you for listening to the podcast, Baby Wearing and Breastfeeding, Nurturing Miracles. And the upcoming episodes, we are actually going to be talking to a mom that found out at her baby's birth that her baby has Down syndrome, and what she went through processing the diagnosis at birth, thinking that she, going through the pregnancy, expecting it to be a healthy term pregnancy. And so how she navigated that. So that's going to be a really great conversation. I'm excited for people to hear that. After that, we're going to be talking to a certified nurse midwife and how she kind of screens people for having birth center births and home births, because that's important, right? So like one thing that we didn't touch on today, that I've mentioned, before, because in my story, is that your birth choices can be deeply personal, and having to navigate a different birthing experience than you expected. That's a whole nother layer. So I'm really excited to get her on and to have her share her information with you guys. So thank you everybody for listening, and we will be back next week. Thank you all for joining us on today's episode of Baby Wearing and Breastfeeding, Nurturing Miracles. I hope you found our discussion enlightening and that you leave feeling supported and empowered. Remember, you are not alone on this journey. Tune in next week for more insights and conversations that connect us all in the shared experience of parenting. Until then, take care and cherish every miracle with your little ones.